All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this July 4th. If you're celebrating, happy July 4th. If you're not, I hope you're still enjoying your day. I am here with someone who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. This man has split the top four of a 1K. He has top aided another. He is the two-time RC Games Enchanted Tournament winner, made top 32 of the Charlie's Collectible Show 8K, won two Inkland set championships, top four to another, going three for three, earning his stitches, and then top four to another Enchanted Tournament. I am here with DJ, the zoologist Guenther, member of Team Ohana. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty well.
Tell me about your background in TCGs. I know you pretty well, but this is the first time you'll have appeared on the channel.
Yeah, absolutely. So my TCG history is honestly not that long and not that luxurious. I am in my low mid 30s, and so I started with TCGs back when Pokemon really came out. I would play that as a kid as soon as the first base set came out. Nothing super hyper competitive, being a poor kid that could barely access cards, but would try my best at going to local scenes. Like they had the gym championship challenges and things like that to earn badges when I could. Yu-Gi-Oh came out, really just kind of I don't want to play with you anymore to Pokemon, changed over to Yu-Gi-Oh because that was the new cool thing to do. In middle school, met up with some friends that played Magic the Gathering, then dropped Yu-Gi-Oh and started playing Magic the Gathering, and I played that on and off from middle school through college. After I graduated from college from NC State University in 2014, didn't really have any friends because we all went our separate ways. So got out of Magic the Gathering, unfortunately. Never played anything super hyper competitive as far as any championships or anything, just kind of local events, no real tournaments with that. So Lorcana was kind of my opportunity to start from the very beginning and just get my name in there. And I love the game. My wife and I love Disney. Went to Disney for the first time for my 30th birthday as a surprise. So, yeah, it's just everything I love all bundled up into one.
Yeah, that's a really awesome journey, man. And you're a prime example of it's never too late to start, right? You're married, have a kid, have graduated, like, and yet you still come out to all these events and perform really well. So it's really good to see. Um, so give me some of your general thoughts on the format. What were some of the things you tested before landing on this deck? Because we crossed paths at a few like tournaments beforehand, and you hadn't been playing Steel Song in this format until now. So what have you been working on before this?
Yeah, so I've been a Steel Song loyalist since this game came out. I kind of saw and honestly, having not been able to practice that much, kind of fell into the rabbit hole of everyone saying that Steel Song fell off, Steel Song's gone when set four came out, and kind of got discouraged after that. I love the steel aspect of Amber Steel, so I saw Blue Steel coming up with its relevance into the Green Steel matchup and kind of transitioned over that, which I know you saw when I we played together at one of the events. Blue Steel, whereas I was not practiced on it, felt okay. And I know some people really like the Blue Steel playstyle. I was not as big of a fan of that Blue Steel playstyle. And really, then I just kind of made the knee jerk reaction of I'm going to go back to Amber Steel, especially after shout outs to Zach Bivens playing the Amber Steel, which kind of gave that deck life in my eyes of saying, hey, don't believe everyone who's saying, it's fallen off. It can still do really well given the right strategies and kind of the mindset with the deck and just playing your outs in each matchup.
Good. Yeah, that's a really great response. I kind of felt the same. I thought that we kind of all wrote it off probably because of like there being multiple ramp decks in the format. Like that typically isn't very good for Amber Steel. Like they don't really like to see Cogsworth. They don't like giving the ramp decks a brand new hand. But like still through that, people like you and Zach and the other like in our area specifically, there's a lot of Amber Steel loyalists. They've still managed to push through the general thoughts of the format and kind of shifted it around here with kind of the I would say the drawback a little bit of red blue going back a little bit. They've kind of come back in full force in this area. So why did you go with this list, and what did you like about it, and what might you consider changing? Because we know you started off basing it on Zach's list, and you played that all weekend, right?
Yeah, I went card for card of what Zach's list was. I had some initial thoughts on having not tested it. RIP to the platform that we no longer have access to for practicing. But yeah, I played it with Zach a good handful of times now, and all of our games are competitive. And him also being very knowledgeable when it comes to Amber Steel and very well tested, I did just go card for card, and then want to kind of almost use the tournaments last weekend as practice with the deck, which I know practicing in a tournament is not always the greatest for that tournament, but I feel like it overall performed very well. And even the cards I had questions on, as far as certain matchups, I found they didn't really tend to do a lot, like the 2-drop Ursula Singer 4. I found it was most times ink in a lot of the matchups, but then, especially in the mirror match, I found that dropping that on turn 2 and just kind of finding the value in each of these picks that have been put into the deck really had their own home in certain scenarios where they couldn't be removed on turn 2 or 3, say that Ursula, and then turn 2 Ursula and into Ariel to find the songs before the Ursula to Deceiver Emerald card can rip that out of your hand, and she can instantly sing it to take out, say, a Diablo. That was really impactful in that, say, green steel matchup.
Yeah, that's a really good point actually. I hadn't like thought about that a lot before because a lot of the Amber Steel like song mirror seems to be like if you go first, you're able to stick your singer and then you shoot their singer and then they never stick a card again. Ursula is like pretty much bound to stick, right? Even with like play 2/1 drop sing strength, like she's still gonna live through that. So yeah, that's actually really good. Tell me about your tournament experience over the last weekend. We'll talk about luxury ball or RC games first and then catch 'em collectibles.
Yeah, so Luxury Ball is my home store that I've gone to for League since the game started. And so a lot of the people I know there, a lot of the Ohana team was there. So it was really nice to kind of combine those worlds of kind of the local store of the local scene that I'm used to, and then also my team. So a lot of very good competition as North Carolina tends to have when it comes to TCGs. I found in those matchups, I did play red blue, which was one of the matchups I really don't like always seeing. Just having that PTSD as an Amber Steel player, you don't really like going up against, say, those blue decks, like you mentioned previously in the interview. Uh, I didn't see any blue steel, which I was happy to see. I only think there was one or two in that tournament at Luxury Ball. In the red blue matchup, I ended up playing that same player. Shout out to Lucas, not to be confused with Luca on our team, but I played him twice on every time we always play. It's very close. So he's usually that control player back red purple in set one, now on red blue. I actually lost to him. He was my one loss in the Swiss phase. I lost 0-2 to him. It was not great. Didn't see any whole new worlds. Kind of just ran out of resources. And once Red Blue gets kind of going, they don't really let you play cards anymore. So refilling your hand is kind of crucial, and that came into play in the top four where I played him again. And I honestly would have probably lost that game three if I had not top decked in top deck mode a whole new world that turn. That really refueled my hand and allowed me to kind of inch across the finish line because this deck really wants to, in those matchups, go as aggressive as possible early and then finish out with your flutes and your kind of passive lore gain there. Did have some green steel at that tournament. I actually played it in the finals. It's I know Green Steel tends to say that Amber Steel has a favorable matchup, but it's still not unwinnable at by any stretch of the means for the Green Steel. I actually had someone reach out today to ask their my take on Green Steel versus Amber Steel since they're having trouble beating Green Steel with Amber Steel. And really, it's just a matter of kind of playing certain lines, what you do with your songs, which I know we'll go into kind of in the Mulligan phase later. But yeah, just overall, really good competition and just thankful I was able to come out on top.
Nice. How do you feel about this deck now going into set championships after this weekend?
Yeah, so this deck, I feel definitely after this last weekend, the hardest matchups being that blue red, I do find that I'm at least comfortable enough having played against enough red blue decks that I kind of know the matchup and I know what my outs are and my ways to winning that. Blue steel, little bit harder. I only played one blue steel matchup over the weekend, and historically, Cogsworth just gives kind of some fear into most blue amber steel players' heads when that hits the board, because there's not a lot of good ways for us to remove it, especially without Big Cinderella, which I was playing very heavily in previous formats. So that is one matchup that I am not looking forward to seeing, and I know at least one of the events I will be seeing someone that I actually was my one match loss out of all three set championships last championships, and I know he's going to be there, so hopefully I can dodge him.
So pretty confident that we can be something that you're comfortable with that we can take for sure. Hopefully that you can repeat last time because you did go 3 for 3 on stitches. So um, now talking about some of the changes that you might make, I know that this is pretty much Zach's list. You're kind of jumping back into playing Amber Steel, but were there any things that felt particularly good or not so good? I know that like I ended up playing Bivens in the glorious X2 bracket, Fetch 'em Collectibles on Sunday, and we had a very good match. And in that matchup, we talked a little bit about how well the deck beats itself sometimes. So he's kind of a little frustrated with it at this point, doesn't know if he'll take it to set championship. So one of the cards that I noticed that he was playing that he was not playing in Chicago was Underworld over Pride Lands. And then Evers and all of his buddies were also testing that, it seemed. And we were discussing it a lot after. And then Luca talked a little bit with Zach about it. And a lot of our discussion came from it being inkable versus uninkable. And then it still gains that passive lore. So it kind of gets that job done there. But it is only 6 health. How do you feel about that going into Maui's per se?
Yeah, exactly. Read my mind. So yeah, I had messaged Zach on Twitter or X, whatever it is now, about kind of the deck changes a little bit, and that was kind of one card that we were talking about because I noticed that he was on the Underworld, and that was one of my considerations for potentially replacing before I tested out the deck over the weekend. But in the end, I did consider, or I did take just card for card his old list. Uh, I do find that in those red matchups on that turn 5 when they're going into Maui, because this deck really into those control matchups like red blue particularly, you really want to diversify your threats on the board. That's when you kind of turn the corner of, okay, we're getting into the end game where my board is probably not sticking for much longer at this point. And I'm going to have to transition to squeaking out as many lore as I can, getting my flutes down, just kind of ramping up those. So that Pride Land's sticking on me playing it on turn 4 or 5, and then them potentially removing it immediately feels pretty bad. If it was going into that Maui matchup, the flip side is uh, he was able to change that out, and it opens up those uninkable slots, which can help that deck not brick so hard sometimes, because sometimes Pride Lands is just an uninkable location that you really don't want to play and just have removed for free, and it takes up that deck slot. He was able to put in more Along Came Zeus, which is a very impactful card that you can almost always find relevant unless they have Bucky's and Cogsworths out, because of how impactful it is and to be able to sing it on to your flutes and all that good stuff. So that was a consideration that I had on before even last weekend, but kind of confirmed with his playing of the Underworld. So yeah, I think locations are in a pretty good spot right now to be teched in, and that inkable status of Underworld definitely warrants consideration to be replaced into this deck.
Nice. Awesome. As someone who doesn't really dabble in the Steel Song deck that much because I feel like every time I play it, I just fold on the deck killing itself kind of thing. I've always thought the Bare Necessities was an insane card, like ever since it was released. Why do you think that Zach only played one? And then how did you feel only playing one? It's in like from an outsider's perspective, it seems really good trying to take it from like blue, like taking quills and like one jumps from blue players on turn 2, like seems just really like impactful for the tempo of the game. So, what do you think about bare necessities? Would you play more, or was one really good?
Yeah, so great question because in previous formats, Amber Steel was not as hyper aggressive as it is feeling right now. It's kind of having to go quicker to get under those other decks that have gotten a lot of support and set for. Whereas you can see there's only the 2-drop Ursula in this list that is a new set 4 card. So it is having to transition to be more hyper aggressive in the early game. And whereas before, singing that bare necessities like with Cinderella on turn 2, which you can already see has been a shift because we're only running 2 Cinderella 1-drops in this deck, so we're not as focused on that kind of control aspect of the game, and kind of just kind of going into that mid game and late game with just kind of combating card for card, hoping for card advantage there. So I will say, having played blue steel quite a lot in previous formats, playing against blue steel, sorry, playing bare necessities on 2 and them not having any fishbone quill or anything really feels bad, because I lost a one of the Ketchum collectibles tournaments. I lost in the top 4 where he didn't have it in his hand game 1 on turn 2. Great, I got no value out of that. He drew his fishbone quill on 3 on curve. Game 2, same exact thing happened where I bare necessity. So it can sometimes feel like a whiff. And I think in this format where you're not really playing that control, you're kind of just going full on aggressive. And if it doesn't gain you lore, if it doesn't remove a character off the opponent's board, I feel like it's not as impactful, which is kind of also why I see this list didn't have the Shift Ursula, which does provide more control of kind of ripping those non-character cards out of the opponent's hand. So I feel like I didn't really miss the extra bare necessities. And I'm not sure if Zach in his new build that he was playing this last weekend, I'm not sure he was even playing any bare necessities.
Interesting.
So that's kind of my take on that, with just us kind of almost transitioning our Amber Steel gameplay into being more aggressive. And not that we don't care about the opponent's hand, but we're
Right.
hoping to just wheel away.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. You're wheeling onto like a lot more now. Like that's kind of the play that you're leaning into. And it makes a lot of sense. Like the 2-drop Ursula seems really good when you're like putting her down and then you wheel and then you're probably gonna wheel into, if you like, if he's playing more Zeus,
Yeah.
you get to like draw your Zeus, and Ursula's, if you keep wheeling every turn, Ursula gets to Zeus something every turn. That's insane. It's powerful. Yeah. Um Okay, so what do you think is mandatory when building this deck?
Oof. Well, I mean, the shift lines are, I feel like, a given with how powerful Robin Hood and the Queen shift lines have been just since their release, really. They just find their way into almost every single Amber Steel list. I'd be shocked to find one that plays less than a 4 count of each, uh, just because of how impactful they are to be able to sing those 5-cost songs. You can have those down even if you don't have your Whole New World or any 5-costs Grab Your Swords. Play those, shift them on either Queen turn 2, Robin Hood turn 3, and then Ariel to find that song to then instantly sing that song. It's just absolutely impactful to have a 5-cost character on the board singing 5-cost songs, which is essentially 10 ink worth of value before turn 5. So I think those are always mandatory. And obviously, I mentioned Ariel. Ariel, I feel like, is always going to be a mainstay. And it was part of the cast shift erase question for Ohana this week, which I love to get my input on. So excited for that. So it's just always going to be impactful. In a meta where you need to be more aggressive and you kind of can't hold board presence, which is, I feel like, always going to be the case in a control heavy meta where there are those control decks that will essentially not let you play the game. Sleepy's Flute is another one that has to be almost included, because that's what's really going to get you across the finish line after your characters kind of fizzle out.
Yeah, those are all really good points, especially with Sleepy's Flute, right? When that card was first getting added into people's decks, it was really like considered like an optional thing, right? Because you could squeeze out that lore and there wasn't as much passive lore, but everyone's just gaining lore for the free these days. So like having that flute seems really important. I agree with that. Let's see. Now let's move into the Mulligan guide. We're gonna go over to Dreamborn, and then I'm going to pull this up, and we're gonna draw some hands, and you're gonna talk me through what you would do through for your Mulligans.
Yeah. All right. So first one, let's see, we got Grab Your Sword. Big Queen, Cinderella, Along Came Zeus, Sleepies, Smee, and Ursula. And a lot of it's going to come down to what the matchup is, if I'm going first or second. Uh, if I'm, say, going against Green Steel, I find, I'll be honest, my kind of strategy into Green Steel a lot of times is I end up actually putting back a lot of my songs. The only time I usually keep multiple songs is if I have, say, a one drop Cinderella and I have multiple the three drop songs to where most they can hopefully rip out as one. And a lot of times, if they're playing an Ursula on turn two and ripping out just one of my songs, they're not doing much else. They're not playing a Bucky. They're not Bucky shift Diablo. So then if they rip one out turn three, I can even hard cast if they shifted Diablo and Storm Rage on my Cinderella. So I would probably keep the Cinderella in most cases for that control. Uh, if I am going first also against Green Steel, a lot of that would be if I see the Queen in my hand, and if I have, say, a Whole New World or the Little Queen, I'm going to be, if not, I'm going to be searching for those, because if I'm going first, I can shift Whole New World before they could ever interact with my side of the board. They can't drop Ursula, they can't drop Bucky, and just draw 14 cards off that Whole New World. So it just kind of refuels your hand before they can start ripping it apart. Uh, Another one being Grab Your Sword is very tempting to keep against Green Steel, simply because they play Bucky, and that's one of our only outs to Bucky. But a lot of times they're going to be fearful of that and potentially rip it out. So you kind of have to almost play a coin flip game of, it's a game of chicken of, they know that you might have a song, but they know that they'll probably try to rip out your song. So you kind of almost flip the coin in some of those matchups of whether or not they're going to try to rip out those. But I find playing character heavy in the early game tends to do fairly well into Green Steel, and also developing a singer and then playing Ariel to find the song is very helpful. So in this, I would definitely say Uninkables kill you in some of the matchups, like you had mentioned in your conversation with Zach Bivens, like it can kind of beat itself. There is a high uninkable count, typically around the 19 to 20 uninkables in most lists. So bricking is a very real thing. I had a mulligan where I drew and I didn't have ink for turn three. So I was stuck on two ink in what my one loss in Swiss in Catch 'em Collectibles tournament. So probably get potentially get rid of Grab Your Swords, Long Came Zeus. If I'm playing against, say, Green Steel, I'm not as worried about flopping down to Sleepy's Flute early because I'm going to be trying to fight for board. Not really going to have time. They're going to start ripping out my cards, and I can't afford to extra uninkable. Ursula, as we mentioned before, is really nice at sticking. So in that matchup, I'm not as worried about getting super aggressive in the early game against Green Steel, because if I can clear their board, if I can develop a board state, I even had a Pride Land stick for something stupid like 6 turns, just because they don't have much to deal with it. And it just gained me so much lore over the course of the game. Smee, I do like being inkable. There's a chance I would potentially pitch it in this matchup just so it doesn't get, storm raged on by the Diablo. But kind of something of this nature where I have characters to play and I'm not going too heavy on inkables. So uh, there's if I was going second, I probably wouldn't keep the queen, just because even if I get whole new world, they're going to see me play that first queen. And one thing about Amber Steel is some of your plays can be very telegraphed. When I ink a Robin Hood, play a queen, more often than not, you probably know I don't have a shift Robin Hood and I have a shift queen. So you're going to think, what is he wanting to do? And you're trying to get into the mind of that player. And so they're going to see, great, he has a shift two queen. Is he going to zap my thing? Is he going to grab your swords? Is he going to hold new world? And they're usually going to rip your song at that point for sure. So if I was going second, I'd probably even put back the queen just for more early board game board presence, and hopefully getting an aerial so we can rip that. And this would be one where I have that kind of scenario that I mentioned earlier of I can play my Cinderella, I have my early singers, I have multiple songs I was lucky enough to get 3 on this, where even if they rip one, they see, okay, well, my Diablo's still dying.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I do like Strength of a Raging Fire against Bucky because they don't get that extra card, since Bucky or Diablo will see that draw card off, let the Storm Rage on, even though he's being banished. So denying them that extra card with Strength of Raging Fire is very nice when you can. But even in those matchups, managing your uninkables is going to be a big aspect. And there have been plenty of games where I actually almost, I don't stop inking, but I kind of slow down on ink, even getting into, even if I skip inking on turn 5. I know turn 5 is very crucial, but if I need to say ink Strength of Raging Fire instead of, and give them the one card just so that I can get ink, that can be also a line.
Interesting. That's a very in-depth explanation in the green steel that I hadn't really like considered before because this isn't a deck that I typically like jump to. But thinking about one thing you mentioned was do you or makes me wonder was talking about when Ursula Deceiver. Do you as a Steel Song player see them dropping Ursula Deceiver on Bucky or instead of Bucky on 2 once they know that you're on Steel Song to try and make sure their Diablo lives? Because one discussion I've had several times with Luca is like when we're playing red purple, if they drop Deceiver on 2 and like we're keeping friends in our mulligan, right? So like if they drop Deceiver on 2 instead of Bucky, that's a win. Even if they're taking friends, like
Yeah.
we're not getting Buckied. But for you, that might be very different, right?
It can be. And again, I'm happy for them to drop Deceiver, especially if I don't have any cards in hand. So whether or not they do or not, I've had some players that will drop that on turn 2. I've had some that just completely decimate my hand. I had someone play, I was playing against um, someone in the Luxury Ball tournament, and before turn 5, they played 3 2-drop Ursulas. And it was just devastating because all my high impact cards were my songs in my hand that they just completely ripped out. And I was like, okay, this should be safe to, not play this turn. I need to develop something on the board. Odds of them having another Ursula are pretty low. And then they had it, and I was like, okay. And I ended up having to really crawl back in that matchup. I still ended up winning, but uh, it was definitely a battle. Needed that top deck whole new world in that one as well.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're getting if you're getting triple buck or triple deceiver, like he's basically bucking you, but like getting to choose what to take out of your hand at that point in that matchup. So that's understandable.
Yeah.
Um, so now let's do for the next two, let's do one where you're going first blind into or not blind, going first into red blue, and then for the last one, we'll just do your going first blind.
Okay.
So this is your new hand for going first, knowing you're going against red blue.
All right. So red blue, a lot of times you're wanting to wheel pretty early and get just as aggressive as possible. Obviously, you're not always going to have that luxury. Uh, red blue, they're not really playing a lot in the early game versus like the red purple matchup where you're going to want to try to zap the Flynn Rider that they drop on turn 2 and then continue your kind of spree of just developing characters and kind of questing. So in red blue, I really don't care for the Cinderella. She doesn't do much. If she's my only one drop, then obviously I play her for that one lore each turn, but that's really most of what she's doing. You got to definitely expect something to be brawled on turn 3 by red blue. So Ursula is another one that ideally I don't really need Ursula to sing songs that early because they're not really playing anything. And even the songs that she can sing, like Long Came Zeus, don't deal with like Flaversham on 4. So you really have to put in a lot of resources to that. I definitely don't keep Let the Storm Rage on because they're not having anything early that I'm going to be really zapping. It is nice to see that I have the Robin Hood shift line. So playing hopefully Robin Hood on 1, Smee on 2, and then shift Robin Hood on 3 is a pretty good play, especially if I'm going first, because that brawl is most likely not going to be able to get that little Robin Hood before I were to shift. Changes if they have Ice Block, of course. Uh, but in that case, if I'm going first, I'm getting to that point first, and hopefully I can even potentially wheel before they get their turn 3 with Robin Hood. So whereas I normally want to look for the Little Queen and Whole New World, this would be one where I may keep the big queen just on the off chance I get, you know, the Little Queen and like a aerial or just a natural Whole New World, and then I shift game plan. But otherwise, at least this is ink for me to get to turn 3 with Robin Hood. So this would probably be what I mulligan here.
All right. Nice.
Okay, so we got the Whole New World. We got a Sleepy's Flute and a Rapunzel. So this would be an instance where I am going with that game plan of, say, inking Queen on turn 1, Robin Hood, probably inking even Rapunzel. Obviously, it depends on my draws. But then playing Smee, questing with both most likely. They don't usually play the 2-drop Rush Queen anymore in red blue, whereas that was a consideration in other formats where if you quest with that Robin Hood on going into their turn 2, it's usually going to be met with that Rush Queen, whereas now it's a lot more free to squeak out that 1 extra lore. And then questing on turn 3 with Smee, unless you wheel with your Robin Hood into like bare necessities. That's another play that I would say. So definitely don't quest with your Smee before you wheel with your Robin Hood shift on turn 3. But yeah, and then you just continue on the gas really.
Nice. Alrighty. So in this last one, we're going blind. You have to consider every deck in the format. This is not locals where you know who you're playing against. What are you doing blind?
Yeah, so blind, I'm probably putting back I would say the Pride lands because of it being uninkable. And if I'm going first, I'd probably say uh, I like getting to Whole New World. It's always kind of a, at least for me as a Steel Song player, is when do I keep a Whole New World in my hand? That's really a hard kind of decision for you to make because if you draw 2, that's really unfortunate. And then also it being uninkable and you potentially just really struggling to get to 5 ink to then hard cast it, you're really feeling like you're struggling at that point, and you're most likely not in a good spot if that's the case. Smee's really good in a lot of matchups. At worst, he is a body that they have to deal with, and at best, he's going to quest for a couple, potentially be Rapunzeled if they don't have an answer for him, or he gets down to 1 health and then he trades with something else. That's usually going to be a trade up that you'll typically take. So I would honestly potentially keep both Smees. Probably go with a Storm Rage on, get that out of there, and potentially Strength as well.
Oops, sorry.
I probably end up doing both just because I don't have an early singer, and I really want to get that Robin Hood shift line, something else going, even an aerial on turn 3. So Robin Hood's me into aerial, and this would probably be one if I'm going blind. I would potentially get rid of the Whole New World because I don't have a shift line. If I did have a shift line, that'd be a different story. So
Mhm.
this would probably be what I keep here with the Smee Robin Hood.
Right. So if you did have the shift line, you could keep the whole new world because you're mulliganing back less. You're less likely to draw the second whole new world. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yep. So this gave us a shift line, thankfully, of queen into big queen. You can also consider just not shifting the queen and getting that Smee down on turn 2. A lot of times I've seen baiting an opponent into getting their removal out can be really nice, where you play a queen and like Ink Robin Hood, play queen, turn 2, Ink Smee or Bare Necessities, play Smee. Uh, it can bait out their removal because they think, oh, they didn't shift queen on 2. They, smash or storm rage on something on like the Smee, and then you drop that shift to queen afterwards. So that those are all lines of play depending on what you're playing into, really.
Nice. Yeah, and just side note on Queen, her effect has always been really good, but
Yep.
in this format specifically, with Castle being like one of the best cards in the format, I've seen it cut like her effect come up so often.
Yeah, and that's another reason to play the Smee on turn 2 if you feel like your queen can overall be safe, because then having another character established so that she can quest, use her effect, and buff one of your characters and surprise your opponent by taking out something for free with your SME is really impactful.
Nice. Well, that was really awesome, DJ. You interviewed really well. So, do you have any
Thank you.
shout outs you want to make?
Uh, I mean, shout out to our team. I'm really thankful for Matthew Logan for inviting me to the team way back when. I know I'm not local to the Greensboro area where kind of Ohana calls home. So I'm a little bit north of Charlotte, and my home store that I go to is still like half an hour away. So it's in the opposite direction. So just being able to be included in kind of Ohana as they grow, I'm just thankful for that. Uh, my local play group. There's a lot of people that I play with at my locals when I am able to go. When my wife, shout out to her for letting me go sometimes. Sometimes I have to be a dad. So really being able to go to these events, play with just some of the most high caliber players. Played obviously Zach Bivens being local to our North Carolina scene. Uh, Played against Zan, who really smacked me at the 8K. Played against George on TFM. Uh, just so many good players that you kind of run into, and just being able to get into the scene and kind of feel, I say, welcomed into the TCG scene has been really humbling for me. As far as I don't have a history of playing Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, and there's just all these high-profile names. So I appreciate just everyone being welcoming in this community.
Yeah, when you come in as a married father with as much skill as you and success as you have, it's kind of hard not to include you, man.
I appreciate it either way.
All right, well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me on the morning of your July 4th. I know that we're all planning on hitting some cookouts later and hanging out with friends and family. So I hope that everyone has a great day. I'm going to try and have this uploaded by before I even leave for this cookout. So hopefully, if you're chilling at the house or you get home later and you're stuffed off of burgers, you have something to watch. And we will see you back on the channel soon.
All right. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, DJ.